Hello there, it's Will here. I'm actually doing this to test whether I can do an Instagram live video from the shed at the end of my garden. Can I get a good enough reception is the question. Having just used the Wi-Fi, the answer is no. So we're just going to try good old 4G and see whether that works. So here I am in the shed at the end of the garden. And I thought whilst I was here testing, I could at least talk a little bit about books as well, because, you know, why not? I don't know about you, but lockdown made reading really, really hard. I found I couldn't concentrate on a book. I'd pick it up, I'd start reading, I'd stop reading, I'd pick up again, I couldn't connect with anything, I couldn't sort of see a book through. So I was really, really struggling. And I thought I might talk about a couple of books that have really helped me to start reading again. Because the question always, if you can't read, is what do you do to kind of get the motor running again? So what I did was I picked up a book on my shelf, which is sat there on my shelf, and looked at me for quite some time. So this is the book here. It's called Calypso by David Sedaris. It was going to be by a friend a long time ago, and it's, as I say, just sort of sat there on the shelf, and I have wanted to read it and meant to read it for a very, very long time, but of course work reading always gets in the way, and then obviously had the perfect opportunity with lockdown to look at what's on the shelf and to think, oh, maybe now's the time. So I picked up Calypso from the shelf, and I actually have never read David Sedaris before, even though he's one of those writers that has been mentioned to me time and time again by people as somebody that you should read. So finally I picked it up and I started reading, and I'm very pleased to say it's immediately hilarious. He's a really funny writer, an amazing observer of people and of situations and of everyday life. And this book, I suppose, if you wanted to look at an overarching theme, it does look a little bit at aging and mortality. But what he does is he just sort of documents these things that have happened in his life and looks at them with this amazing sense of humour. Literally every paragraph has got a sentence in it which is just delightfully put together, or a piece of reported speech that just makes you laugh out loud. It's absolutely brilliant, and because each little section is quite short, it was a really good way of getting reading again, having got a little bit stuck with the books that I was trying to see through, the novels I was trying to see through. So a bit like reading short stories, but non-fiction short stories, and very, very funny. So if you've never read David Sedaris before, I don't know whether this is a good place to start or not. This is just the place where I have started, but I heartily recommend Calypso by David Sedaris. And another book I've read recently, which I have really enjoyed, bizarrely given the situation that we're all in, is this one here, Notes from an Apocalypse by Mark O'Connell. And I'm reading this because I'm going to be interviewing Mark for the Waterstones podcast. And what he does in this book is to sort of visit various parts of the world and various people who are in different ways sort of dealing with the end of the world. So for example, he goes to America and he meets up with some people who are called preppers, so people who are preparing for the breakdown of civilization by building bunkers in their houses or investing money in sort of much larger scale bunkers or communities underground, or luxury houses that have amazing abilities to somehow protect them against the breakdown of life as we know it. He also looks at people who are interested in going to Mars and taking the human race to another planet. He visits Chernobyl, which is an actual sort of end of the world scenario. And he does all of this with, again, an amazing sense of humour, which might seem a bit bizarre given that you're looking at the end of the world. But also he's sort of approaching it, I guess, as a thoughtful man, but also as a father, somebody who is very worried about the world that his child is sort of growing up into. And it's just brilliant, and also sort of slightly depressing, but also with moments of hope in it as well. I can't wait to talk to him about the book, because it's really interesting to sort of read it with the world as it is right now, and to have a little think about what this might have to teach us about the way that we live our lives, and when we come out of lockdown, when this is sort of all a distant memory, how we might live our lives slightly differently in the future. So Notes from an Apocalypse by Mark O'Connell is absolutely fantastic too. As I mentioned there, the podcast, Waterstones podcast, I am reading some really interesting stuff at the moment in order to create some more episodes for what is now season 4 of the podcast. And what I'm trying to do is to create episodes which have got something for us right now with what we're all going through, and I'm trying to put something positive out there. So we've already had an episode with Julia Samuel, who's a psychotherapist, who talks about coping with change in your life, which is something I think we're all learning to deal with. And I'm going to have episodes coming up on the idea of kindness, the idea of togetherness and why that's important, and community, and as I mentioned there, Mark O'Connell, and I've got other stuff coming up too. But my hope is that by releasing these episodes, I'm going to be giving you something positive to help get through what is obviously a very, very tricky time. And another thing I did, which made me feel good, was to gather up some of the books that are in my house that I don't need anymore. I wouldn't mind losing from my shelves, or duplicate copies of books and things like that. And I put them all in a box and I put them out on the street with a little note saying, help yourself. Grab a book, read it, and I put my email address on there just to say if you want to tell me what you thought of the book, then you can do that too. And it's just been really nice. I've already had people email me to say thank you for the books, and I'm sure they'll email again once they've read them. This sense of community, I'm sure you may find as well wherever you live, is really blooming. People are starting to obviously connect more with neighbours because of necessity, but also because it's nice. And I know that when I used to live in London, it took me years to actually get to know many of my neighbours. It's completely different now that I live in Hertfordshire, where we're all pretty friendly. But actually, even so, on my road, even though we all know each other fairly well, there are still a lot of people who I'm only seeing for the first time when we all go outside and clap for the NHS on Thursday evenings. So I'm very heartened by this improved sense of community locally, and also I think even on social media, which is a tricky place to live sometimes. I do sense that people are starting to use it in a more positive way recently, so let's hope that that continues too. Anyway, that's all from me. This has worked without interruption, which means I can actually do some of my work on Instagram Live next week, so thank you for helping me to do that, and bye.